He's here at Northeastern, and I'm really happy to welcome you all this cold, damp, slippery evening. Glad you all got here, and we hope you have a really good time. This is a really special event for us. It's featuring Boston's one and only Vega Trio, and it's going to be an even more special event than you might have realized, because things have taken a really very unfortunate turn this evening, and Al himself is sadly not going to be able to be with us. We learnt this afternoon, just late this afternoon, that he'd had a medical emergency and been admitted to hospital, and so he's not going to be able to participate. And you'll hear a little more about that in a minute from my good friend, Professor Leonard Brown, who's going to be talking to us. Anyhow, I hope you'll be able to stand the disappointment. We're going to have a really good evening, and we're not going to let this dampen our spirits. So we're going to have a full session of great jazz and a lot of insight into Al's life and his accomplishments. But before we start with the real business of the evening, I wanted to say a few words about tonight's arrangements and to thank some people who've put this evening together. And the first thing to do is to thank all you for coming, of course. This is your event. But it's also a special collaboration between the university libraries, who have a Meet the Author series, and the Office of Alumni Relations and their Arts Live series. So we have a coming together here of music and literature, which is really quite cool. You can find out about the libraries Meet the Author series on our website, and you can find out all about the Alumni Relations Arts Live series on their website. And do that, and you can see some of the other good stuff that's coming up. Now, in addition to the library and to Alumni Relations, we need to thank one other partner on campus here for co-sponsoring this event this evening, and that's Northeastern's very own Unity Gospel Ensemble. I'm not sure if there's anybody here from the ensemble. Yes, good to see you, and thank you for helping make this happen. Yeah, there we go. And I have a few more special thanks for the people who've worked so hard to bring this evening together. Amy Belmore, who's Director of Alumni Relations. Yeah. Nina Shah and Kelsey Strout from the library's Marketing and Advancement Department. And then a whole gang of people from the library's Programming and Communications Committee, and some of them are here this evening as well, so thanks for that. And in case you hadn't noticed, we're filming this evening. It's hidden over there behind the pillow if you want to stay out of sight. But you'll be able to watch the canned version of this on YouTube and on iTunes University in the fullness of time. And you can find out more about this event and all the other events I've been talking about by checking in on Facebook and Twitter, where all this stuff is covered. Now, I want to introduce you to Leonard Brown, himself a very special sort of institution here at Northeastern. Leonard is Associate Professor of African American Studies and Music. He's the author of Boston's jazz legend, The Vega Story, a book documenting Al's life in all its glorious detail. And before this afternoon, Leonard thought that was going to be his whole part of this event this evening, providing us with more background on Al and what inspired him to write the book. And he still plans to do that. But now we're about to be in his debt for a good deal more, as he's agreed, how should we say, to bring a new sound to the Vega Trio by substituting his saxophone for Al's keyboard. In case you didn't know, Leonard's a truly accomplished musician. He's a saxophonist, a composer, an arranger. He's a teacher. He's an ethnomusicologist, and he's a specialist in multicultural education. During his almost four decades? As a performing musician, he's appeared with many outstanding artists. The list includes Alice Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, George Russell, Bill Barron, Yusuf Lateef, Alan Dawson, and Ed Blackwell, to name but 8. And Al Vega. He's performed nationally and internationally, and he's co-founder and producer, and I think he's particularly proud of this, of Boston's annual John Coltrane Memorial Concert. And he's going to, yeah, there we go. And he's going to be joined this evening by the amazing Ron Della Chiesa, who I'm sure you all know from WGBH. Yes, right. From hosting the BSO, from his years of highly articulate jazz scholarship, and he'll be on hand to talk us through this evening and co-host the event. And Ron, did you bring your trumpet this evening? No, right, okay. Anyway, it's time for me to thank you once more and to hand over to Leonard, who's going to be your compere for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'm going to move this before I trip on it. Well, good evening. I want to thank you all so much for coming. I also want to thank Amy and Nina. I think it's where this idea started last summer. And I want to thank them so much because if it hadn't been for their hard work and professionalism and collaboration, I don't think this event would have come off. So I want to thank you all both from the bottom of my heart. Amy's back there, Nina's over here. I also want to thank the alumni and other interested folks, students that I've had, and friends and neighbors for coming out on this kind of a rainy evening here in New England as we on the cusp of another Thanksgiving time, and I would imagine all of us have some reason to give thanks next week. So I also want to begin that by giving thanks to you, for all of you all for coming out this evening. Much appreciated in this celebration of the legacy of Aaron Vagramian, whose professional name is Al Vega, but his real name that his mother and father gave him in 1921 was Aaron Vagramian, and I'll get into that a little bit. He's of Armenian and Bulgarian ancestry, okay? So we'll get into that a little bit. But before I get into that, I also want to thank Ron for being willing to be a part of this. When I started conceiving of this event for Al, and that was my motivation for doing this really was about getting Al his props, his dues, because I firmly believe he's one of the great musicians of our time. And we're fortunate to have had him with us for so long, and the fact that he's still playing a lot of music. My heart was dropped today when I got the call in my class, and I usually don't answer my cell phone in class, but since we all will get to know one another, I'm on the verge of grandparenthood. So when the phone rings and my wife is already down with our son, and this could happen any second. So when the phone rings, I'm picking it up because I don't know what's happening, right? So, and the class was going, and we were actually in the middle of a documentary looking at the role of music in the South African freedom struggle in the course that I teach here. And the phone rang, so I jumped out in the hall and answered. They didn't look to see who the number was. Who's going to do that? This might be the first grandchild, right? And it's Linda Gaffney, who is a woman who lives in Al's house and provides a significant amount of support for Al. And she was upset, and Al had fallen. And she had called 911, and she was calling to let me know. And I told her, I said, take care of Al. I'll talk to you later. Don't even worry about anything else. She was concerned about the event tonight. And I was like, don't worry about the event tonight. Take care of Al. Since that time, we've learned that Al fell at his home where he lives in Everett, and he was taken to the local hospital. They're checking him out. They're going to keep him overnight, even though, Dave, did you hear you heard him? Or Rick, was one of you all heard him in the background on the telephone wanting to get out of there? But I think for his health and well-being, it's a good thing. The fact that he fell out and passed or fell down, I'm not so sure what it was. Clearly, some of the tests they ran at the hospital gave them cause and reason to want to keep him overnight. So keep him in your prayers. If you haven't said a prayer for Al yet, say one tonight, 2 or 3 on the way home and in the morning, because he's very deserving. So given the situation, and when I called Amy and Nina about it, because it's so late, we decided to go on with the event. Al called me at home, what's the day, Thursday? He called me Tuesday and asked me, hey, Leonard. I said, hey, how you doing? I want you to play with me Thursday night. And I've played with Al's a number of times at different places over the years. I said, I'm flattered that you would ask me to play with you. I said, just slow him down, because Al's known for them up-tempo numbers, am I right? Look out. Nick, yeah, he likes the fast one. So I brought my soprano in today, and actually came in early and thought I'd get a chance to practice. Forget that. All right. But anyway, I've got it. So what we decided to do when I talked to Dave and Rick, right? And this is Rick Klane, a drummer who's been with Al now for 25 years right here. Dave, how long have you been with Al? How long have you been playing with Al? Since 1981, he's been with Al. That's 30 years, right? So we decided that we would try to keep the spirit of the music and move on with it. Now, unbeknownst to us, we have had a magnificent piano player walk in the room, and we might have to move that piano up here because I'm not going to put it too much on the spot yet, but her name is Virginia Eskin, and she's sitting right over here with Ron Della Chiesa. So we might be able to get her to do a couple of tunes before we get out of here. But we thought we'd move on with some music, hopefully within the aesthetic that would be appropriate to Al. Summer will be just horn and piano and horn and drums and bass. Maybe we can get Virginia. She's going to have a hard time telling me she's not going to play now because I put her out on Front Street. Play a little music with her tonight because she's a marvelous musician. So that's kind of where we are on this at this point. What we want to do is we want to talk a little bit. I think we're probably going to play a couple of tunes here in a minute. I'm going to let Ron come up and say a little bit first, and then we'll play a couple of tunes. And then Ron and I are going to kind of talk a little bit about our relationship with Al and what that has to do with that. And we're going to ask Rick and Dave also over the night to talk a little bit about their relationship. They can give you some insight to Al as a musician and what his legacy is about. We'll try to contextualize this in and out. We'll come back to some music, then we'll come back to some talk. I'm sure some of you out there in the audience may have some memories or some perspectives on Al that you want to share with the group. So we'll kind of move on with the program as we continued, as we planned it out. And keep Al in our hearts, and hopefully that we'll be able to rise to the occasion. I want to introduce Ron Della Chiesa, who has a new book out, and you should hurry up and go to Amazon and get it. It's called Radio My Way. Those of you who have been in New England for a minute and really serious music lovers would know Ron's legacy, not only on WGBH, but what's the radio station down in Plymouth? WPLM, and also with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, am I right? Yes. So without further ado, the voice, Ron Della Chiesa.
Leonard, you are so good and so tall. So nice to be in this. What a beautiful room this is. I understand this is fairly new. How many events have we had here so far? Is this? Really? Wonderful. I have a strong connection with Northeastern with the lovely Ginny Eskin, who we go way back together. And as Leonard said, she is truly one of the most remarkable artists to come our way in a long time, particularly what she's done with women composers, the whole genre of that era that she literally brought back and saved, Ginny. So it's so nice that you're here. What a nice surprise. And the other connection I have is at Northeastern University, on the campus side of Northeastern University over here, there was a famous building that's no longer there. It's called the Boston Opera House. If you walk by Huntington Avenue up from Symphony Hall, you'll see a sign. It says Opera Place. That has a very special spot in my heart because that's the place where I first heard opera. My father loved opera. He played all those old Caruso recordings on his Victrola. Now, those of you who are younger probably know what a Victrola is. Does anybody here know what a Victrola is? All right, okay. I see a lot of white hair when that guy. Recordings were made in the days of the early recording industry. Edison invented recording in 1877, but he invented a cylinder phonograph that played on a cylinder much looked like a dictaphone that he called the Edison cylinder gramophone. And 10 years later, a man named Emil Berliner invented the flat disc, which became the Victrola, the RCA Victrola that became known all over the world. It had a crank on it, so there was no plug. Everything you heard was all acoustic. So you had to stand to make a recording in those days, whether you were the great Caruso or the young Louis Armstrong. Leonard and I talked about this, Bessie Smith, all the early jazz artists, the early opera singers. Remember, they all recorded acoustically. So it was the sound of their voice in that horn, and believe it or not, it was the strength of their sound from the horn or from the instruments that cut the stylus into beeswax. It was a disc made of beeswax. That was called the master disc. And then when they had the master disc, it was like Mom's waffle iron. You could turn it out and stamp out as many recordings from that one master disc. That all ended in 1925 when electrical recording came in. And everybody was able to record electrically with condenser microphones. So instead of bringing a whole orchestra and a singer crowded into one little room around this horn, I'm sure you've seen those horns, those old-fashioned Victrolas with the big horn. Usually there's a dog listening to that horn. His name is Nipper, by the way. That's a whole other story. We were able to greatly improve recording technique because it was like lifting a huge velvet drape away from the singer of the orchestra. You could hear the lows and the highs and the middle frequencies. And it was quite a revelation. When I talked about the old Boston Opera House, when I heard those voices coming back from me on that stage, nothing was plugged in. Singers like that never use microphones. So you use a whole other technique to train your voice as an opera singer. And Leonard points out in this book, Leonard, I saw the date of Al's birth, 1921, and that was the year that Caruso died. So the great Caruso never lived to make an electrical recording. He missed it by 4 years. Al Vega made many recordings, and one of the first ones I have is a 10-inch LP that he made when he was playing up at the Hi-Hat, which is a jazz club at the corner of Columbus and Mass Ave. Al was the house pianist at the Hi-Hat, so he was the guy that was there all the time. And anybody who came in, they'd play with Al because he had the house group. And what names Al played with, Leonard talks about him in this book, and Al told him these wonderful stories. Played with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, the young Miles Davis, and then later on he worked with some of the guys who were around this area, like Charlie Mariano and Herb Pomeroy. You know, if anybody's a living legend, Al Vega is a living legend. And, you know, I really expect him to walk through that door tonight. He's the kind of musician that if he's committed, he never misses a gig. But he's under doctor's orders to stay in bed and sort of wait this one out. Here's a man who is undergoing kidney dialysis and coaches baseball. He coaches a Little League and Babe Ruth baseball. He's still been very active in doing that, plays 3 or 4 jobs a week, has tremendous energy, and the thing that I think makes all of us amazed about Al Vega is his commitment to the music and his commitment to young musicians. He's given so many young singers and instrumentalists their first start with his open mic sessions that he started years ago over at the Logan Airport Hilton Hotel. And that's when I first heard Al Vega. That was about 35 years ago. Now, the Logan Airport Hilton Hotel was kind of the crossroads of everybody coming in and out of Boston. The Logan Airport wasn't as huge as it is now. But 35 or 40 years ago, the Logan Airport Hilton was the place to be entertained, and Al had the house trio there. All kinds of characters came into the Logan Airport Hilton. Once Al was playing there, I was sitting there, and Al said, "Hey, Ron, would you like to get a nice London fog coat? There's a guy with a trunk outside. He's selling them for $10. I still have that London fog coat. I mean, the place was filled with Damon Runyon-esque characters, you know. But meanwhile, Al was doing his thing. Young singers were coming in there, like Rebecca Paris, who he'd say, "We got a wonderful young singer here tonight. You probably haven't heard her. Rebecca Paris, get up and sing." Donna Byrne. And then later on, he discovered Ted Cashier, who went on to become one of our foremost tenor saxophone players. And in this day and age, only a few years ago, he brought up a brilliant young Asian saxophonist named Grace Kelly. She first started with Al Vega. He had everybody, not just saxophone players, not just singers, but one time, believe it or not, he invited a musical saw player to come up, and the guy was good. The guy was good. He played Dizzy Gillespie's song on the musical Saw. This is the kind of person Al was. He had no barriers. And he was instrumental in starting all these people on their careers because he gave them that shot. And, you know, once you get up and appear before an audience and perform, that's the best test of all. Leonard can vouch for that fact. The audience can tell you when you're good or bad. So we have a national treasure in Vega, and I'm so glad that just a few weeks ago, Leonard had a previous commitment and wasn't able to make it, but right outside Vega's house, they dedicated the Vega Square in his honor. The mayor showed up, state representatives, the city council. Al was so delighted and happy, and a group of about 10 musicians played in Vega Square for the first time, dedicated to the man who was standing there. And they all played acoustically. There were no microphones, and they all sounded great. So maybe a bit later on, we'll have more of an exchange, and we can read something from Leonard's wonderful book. If you don't have it, you should get it. It's a wonderful story, a real Horatio Alger story about a young man of Armenian descent who came up and never compromised his talent with anybody. Boston's jazz legend, The Vega Story by Leonard Brown. It's a great read, and I was honored when Leonard asked me to write the preface.
Ron, they're for sale over here.
Yes, it's for sale right over here. So if you get a chance, pick it up on the way out.
Okay.
Leonard,
Thank
you.
Music.
Yeah, we'll do some music, man.
Well, let's start all the music, man. G, concert G. Yeah. You want to get it set up a little bit? You want to give me a little setup there? Or you want me to start it?
Either way.
You set it up. We're going to do autumn leaves since that's what's happening outside, okay? Great musicians here. Rick Klane on traps. Dave Zox. We got family come from the same place because he's from Columbus, Ohio. I got some deep family on my mother's side of the family from Columbus also. Rusty Brown was from Columbus, Ohio, too. Great keyboard player, but now I've started drifting. Don't get me to drifting. Since we're in the kind of seasonal stuff, how about summertime? Because we're going to get there sooner or later. We just left it, but it's good to remember it, isn't it? Except for that hurricane. Summertime, whatever key you want to put in, I'll play it. You pick it. You start it out. See mine fine. Start this up. Can we do it as a what? Can you do it as a, can we do it, what? You said it. Do it as 6, maybe, or 3, or what? Yeah, go for it. Dave Zox. Rick Klane. Okay. So, thank you. I was trying to get a couple of good vocalists I know in the room to come up, but they're a little resistant now. Maybe they'll loosen up and come on up because we got some great singers in this room, I can tell you. And we might get them loosened up a little bit later. I want to give a little perspective on now. Actually, we do have a mic. Let's do it over here and make it like over the whole week. Is this working? Yeah. So let's say this is dinner time with Ron and Leonard. After dinner discussion about how significant this music is in American music history and in world music history. This music has made the world a better place. This stuff that gets generically called jazz. It has made the world a better place. Am I right about that, Ron?
Absolutely. You know, jazz actually broke down the Iron Curtain. You know, that's how powerful jazz was because Voice of America years ago, there was a disc jockey. His name was Willis Conover, and his voice was the most listened to voice in the world because what happened was the Russians condemned jazz music as being, quote, capitalistic warmongering music, simply because it was so free. And it was, a lot of it was improvised. And of course, they didn't want anything that was free. They wanted to stamp out freedom. Jazz is an example, of one of the best examples of freedom. Nobody can tell you how to play jazz, just like Leonard just played it. He walked around like the Pied Piper of jazz here. He's a free man. And they couldn't silence the Voice of America. The Russians tried to jam Voice of America. They had these jamming stations, but, you know, it survived. And ultimately, jazz became popular all over Russia and all through those communist-dominated countries at that time. Czechoslovakia, Romania. They all began to have little clandestine jazz clubs that had to meet secretly to play their music because the communists would come in and break up their little jazz clubs. I got that once from a gentleman who was from Romania who started one of the first Romanian jazz societies. So there's truth. There's something in jazz that comes through that'll survive any kind of obstacle, whether it be an iron curtain or racism. Jazz transcends all of that.
Thank you, Ron. Just to contextualize it a little more, taking Ron's chord lead there on that solo and keep it in the music vein. In terms of why I did this book on Al, okay, because I think it's important, at least for me, to share that with you. And it really has to do with my involvement as a musician first, and then later on moving into academia as an historian and an ethnomusicologist. But I should say that all the insight I have that I do as a teacher or as an educator and scholar all comes through my performance of this music, right? Because I think music is different. You know, writing about music is not music. Talking about music is not music either. Music is music. Just like talking about dance is not dance. There's an aspect of dance that involves movement. So about 11 years ago, I guess, when we had the John Coltrane Memorial Concert, the year 2000, and we had Nat Hentoff and Frank Foster. Where's Frank soul? Frank just passed last summer, right? Frank was our guest artist and performer. And we had Nat, who was a Northeastern alum and who knows not about the music, grew right over here with Roxbury when it was pretty much a Jewish community. And similar parallel time frames with Al, even though Al's probably got about 5 years on him in this greater Boston area. Anyway, we had a symposium over there. I think it was the Snell Library or the Regan Research Center. I can't remember. And both of these gentlemen were talking about the music and their perspectives on it. And, so after it was over, I can remember this older gentleman who was talking to Nat. He looked like he was about Nat's age, but he seemed to have all these questions about Boston jazz history and just new stuff, and they were talking like they were old friends. So I kind of went up and said, "Hey, man, how you doing? My name is Leonard Brown. Glad you came." He said, "Oh, my name is Al Vega." And it's the first time I'd met him. You know, I had been in Boston since 1974. I was out here for a while, but I came back and had been here in the Northeast and I played a lot in the greater Boston, New England area. But I had just moved into a vice provost position here at Northeastern with a specific intent to open up opportunities for underrepresented populations here. Folks that usually get cut out of higher education opportunities. There was a specific initiative with a forward-thinking administration at the university at that time to really make some concerted moves to provide more opportunities for a wider range of students coming to Northeastern. We have since gotten a little weak on that, but that's a whole nother discussion. And so I talked with Al, and it was fascinating. The more I talked to him, it's like, Jesus, this guy knows about everything. I had gotten involved in some ways with Boston jazz history with some things I did in helping desegregate the Boston public schools, where we used music as a very powerful force to wade into South Boston, to all that ignorance and discrimination that was existing in the minds of people in terms of somehow or another somebody's skin color makes them better than somebody else, or that somebody's skin color makes them worse than somebody else. I had grown up with that foolishness down in Kentucky and in the South. So when I came here to Boston in '74 and saw the Great North with the same old issues, I was like, well, let me roll up my sleeves and get into this, because I've had 25, 30 years of this already, so we can do some things. And we use music as a powerful force. We use music from the various cultures that were represented in District 6 of the Boston Public Schools at the time, right? So I had some familiarity, and through that, and through my working, I had some familiarity with the Boston community and knew about a lot of the jazz history here. I knew about Conley's, where the Harriet Tubman House is where hi-hat used to sit, and all these places through people I had known and met during my years here. So anyway, I talked to Al, and the more I talked to him, the more the history came out. So, I got to a point in my job that I opened up Thursday afternoons. I would go to Cambridge, and we'd meet out at a certain spot, and we'd sit and talk for 2.5 to 3 hours. And I did this over a 2-year period. And I interviewed him about his life, and we talk about the music and what his experiences were and things like that. And the more I talked to him, the more fascinated I became with him. Then he says, oh, come over to East Boston to play with me, because he knew I was a musician. So I go to East Boston, and we play around in Cafe Italia. Right, boy, that was a trip. But and so we played at the Cafe Italia. In fact, that's the first time I met Grace. He came in and sat in on it. We played some great music together. And so I'm getting more involved with him, and I see what he's got. So making a long story short, I did this over a couple years, and then I thought I had it, and I transcribed, spent a lot of time transcribing it, and then I shopped it around to publishers. None of the major publishers want to touch it. They said, it's too local a story, we can't make money, there's not enough interest in it, et cetera, et cetera. So I put it on the back burner, and I went and did some other things, et cetera. Well, last fall, I began to think about it again, right? I got all this information on Al, et cetera, and through some publishing experiences I've had over the last 2 years, I got a much more in-depth understanding of what the publishing business is about. To some degree, it reminds me of the old record companies, right? You make a record for them, all of a sudden, you owe them all this money. But if you don't have nobody to play the music, how can they owe you money? But anyway, it was the publishing business. The publishing business is kind of like that. They do you a favor to put your book out, but they want to take all the money. But if you're not writing nothing, what do they have to publish? So as I got familiar with that, my wife, Cheryl, and I was talking to her about Al, how important I thought the story was, and I felt I needed to get it out because I know Al's hovering on, headed toward his 90th birthday. Just like all of us, none of us are going to be here forever. And I felt a responsibility. So we moved on it, and we decided to self-publish it. And I worked real hard over the winter into the spring, interviewing people, got Ron to do the foreword, and gathered a lot of information, put it out. I gave it to Al on his 90th birthday, last June the 20th, wasn't it? 2011. And then we had the big celebration in Scholars. So what I hope is in the book is really Al's story. It's not like me trying to interpret Al's story and give it back. It's not about me trying to chronicle all the history of jazz in Boston and New England and position Al in that. It's not about any of that. It's really Al's words. I had to edit them in some places, and I tried to give some context to it where I thought it was necessary. But basically what you read in this book is either Al's words and words of people who knew him that I also interviewed in the book. And that's what it was designed to do. My wife also said, she said, well, if you really think about this, Leonard, most of the people who are going to be buying this book will be Al's age or near it, so make the print big. He was right. So there ain't no font size 10 in here. You can read this action. It's a little small on the back, but you won't have no problem reading, and that was on purpose, and it's in bold, so it's easy to read. We're not interested in making a lot of money on this book. It's really not about making the money. It's about what I feel is some of our responsibilities as musicians and educators. If we don't tell our story properly, then we leave it to other folks who don't really understand what the music is about to tell it, and then that tale can get kind of skewed. So that's what this is about. Maybe Ron, so like you got some parts in there you want to share with people?
The nice thing about what Leonard did is you hear Al talking. You know, you can hear his voice here. For example, this is about, and there's so much history here about Boston being the great jazz city, epicenter of what was going on. Of course, New York was the Big Apple. There was 52nd Street, all the clubs in Harlem. But there was a lot going on here in Boston. And I was privileged to be around kind of toward the tail end of it, but I still got a good glimpse of some of these giants. Here's what one of the passages in the book, Al relates to what he did and how he started. He said, first of all, I was doing classical and I was taking composition, but I still wanted to be a Hollywood writer or something. But here I am working opposite Teddy Wilson, Earl Father Hines. All the great piano players were coming to the hi-hat, corner Mass and Columbus Ave. Oscar Peterson, Errol Garner, plus Charlie Parker, Lester Young, Dizzy Gillespie. I wasn't getting the chance to touch the piano all day because I was writing music around the clock. So I said, I can't do this. What am I proving here? To do composition, I'd have to quit work and let the family starve for 3 or 4 years. Then go to Hollywood and starve another 3 or 4 years. Well, I figured that the only thing that makes sense is that I switch to piano major. And that way, I'd had double piano classes, and instead of writing, I'd be practicing piano. When I went to work at night, I wouldn't feel like I was inadequate. We had piano classes and sight reading classes during the day. You'd sit down and actually play the piano. That way, I'd get a little confidence, so when I went to work at night, I could hold my own. I was teaching at Berkeley, going to the conservatory, and playing 7 nights at the hi-hat in 1950, 1951, and 1952. Then I shifted to Storyville because the hi-hat wanted me to go back to doing single. But by this time, I had a trio, and he still does. I figured if I went back, I might not ever get the trio again. With his move to Storyville in 1952, Al was the pianist in the house trio. Storyville was George Wean's club in the Copley Plaza Hotel, by the way, the Copley Square Hotel, I should say, not to be confused with the Copley Plaza. They were competing with the hi-hat. George Wean, who of course went on to found the great Newport Jazz Festival, had a house trio, which I ended up playing mostly with because George was doing business, going out of town booking. The house trio was Roy Haynes, Boston's own Roy Haynes on drums, who's still out there. I think, how old is Ray? 85? 85 years young. And Slam Stewart on bass. That was a super trio. I'd worked with Georgie Auld at the hi-hat, which was an interesting story. There was another group they had booked. The hi-hat owners came running up to me that first night and said, this group isn't what we want. It was my friend Nick Jarrett. They had a cool group, and nothing was happening. But it was exciting, man. They said, can you get a new group? So I got Joe Gordon, a great trumpet player, who unfortunately died very young. He worked at the stables with Herb Pomeroy's band. I got a couple of different bass players to fill out the week, and my good drummer, Sonny Takaloff, who I knew, he ended up being a toll taker on the Mystic River Bridge. We played with Georgie also. That was a nice week with Georgie. He was a great tenor man, and what a character. He used to say to me, what do you want to play? I said, you're the leader, pick a tune. Then he'd say, I just came off Broadway. I'm used to doing 20 minutes a night. Al said, we had a good week. Well, when Storyville wanted me, they offered me the gig. I didn't want to stay at the hi-hat because they wouldn't let me keep the trio. At Storyville, I didn't come in with the trio, but we had a house trio. I figured at least if I want to go back to the hi-hat, they'd have to give me the trio. I didn't want to say, okay, I'll do whatever you want. I'll do a single. So that way I kept it open for a trio in case I wanted to go back. At Storyville, we had the house trio most of the time. Slam Stewart was living in a hotel. Now, usually when he'd come down, he had been drinking. And he'd take one of his bass solos, zoom, 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 zoom. And then he'd start all over again. Get to the top of his instrument and then start up again. Georgie would come up and say, "Get him off." After minutes of his solo, he'd go zoom, 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 ta-da, big chord, and then he'd say, "Thank you." Leonard said, asked Al, how many nights a week were you working then? Al said, 7. And the matinees too? I didn't do the matinees, although I did at Storyville. At Storyville, I did them because they had a real matinee as far as the group. At the hi-hat, one reason I didn't do matinees was I wanted to have some time with my family. Another reason I didn't care about missing the hi-hat was that it was a true jam session. You didn't hear the group. It was Charlie Parker and his group, or Lester Young and his group. Most of the time, they'd do like the whole Ken Club. Then they'd split their group up, and all of the visitors would sit in. At Storyville, I did work the afternoons. I didn't want to miss someone like Art Tatum. Leonard Brown. Did you see Tatum a fair amount? Al Vega. I saw him 7 nights a week. I'd seen him on 52nd Street when I stopped on the way back from the service when I was stationed down south. Leonard, what was your opinion of Tatum? I always thought he was the greatest. And then Oscar Peterson came along. I liked him too, but I liked Tatum better in a solo context. I enjoyed the trio, but he was so busy with so much happening, I didn't think he needed a trio. Somewhat like I think Dave McKenna plays with his left hand. What a book, Leonard. Let's give this man a round of applause for getting this story down. Posterity. And that's just a teaser. It's the whole page after page is like that.
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to go over here to Rick and Dave and let them talk a little bit because they've been working with Al. Where y'all? Rick is over here.
Sure. I'm going back into the early 80s now, and we had a gig on the South Shore, and Al, this is before MapQuest or whatever else, so Al had me look up the directions, and it was somewhere down past Brockton, maybe Bridgewater. So Al met me in Braintree, and he said, "I'll follow you." So we're going at a good clip, and all of a sudden, I lose Al. There's no Al behind me. No rearview mirror. So I slow down quite a bit, and I'm waiting. And sure enough, I see his car coming up. As he's passing me, he's got his left hand putting his shoe on, changing into his tuck shoes, and in his right hand, he's got an electric razor, and he's shaving, and he's steering with his knees. But he had it all together at that point, and it was working for him, and he now, let's say, as to his multitasking, will come back from a gig that might be like 9 to 1. Al, now, he's not a technophobe, but the machinery that he likes is like a VCR. He still has 2 of those, and a DVR. So when he gets home from a gig at 1 o'clock, he has at least one Celtics game on tape. Not this year, but he'll have a game on tape. He'll have 2 favorite shows, and he'll be up till 5 in the morning watching either VCRs or DVDs, and often he'll be taping, even at 5 in the morning, he'll be taping something else to watch the next day. So he's an amazing man. I wish he could be here with us tonight, and he has many stories to tell, and he's not shy to tell them. I'll turn you over to David, who actually preceded me by probably 2 or 3 years, I think.
So thank you very much, everybody. It's a pleasure to talk about my dear friend Al, who I owe him a lot because I came to Boston wanting to be a professional jazz musician, and because of his, if you will, tutelage and support and, all the work he's given me, to tell you the truth, between 1981 and now, I'm able to play, and he's helping me, get my daughters through college. So that isn't why I went into it, but I have a lot of appreciation for him, sincerely. And I'm not quite as entertaining as Rick, so I sort of go for the other side. To talk about Al, it's not like I never talk about him, because kind of being in a band with somebody is sort of like the less romantic part of a marriage, in that you kind of get familiar with people's less appealing aspects because it's in your face. So, Al's probably been talking about me and Rick, like Rick and I, and everybody's been talking about everybody else. It's kind of one of those things. What's the thing about potatoes in a barrel? In Japan, they cleaned potatoes by rubbing them against each other. So kind of in a band, you're sort of potatoes rubbing against each other. Anyway, that's irrelevant to Al. But I I have to say, you guys, I've really learned a lot about, you know, if you will, about life from Al, because he's really a spirited guy. He's 90, and he's writing new arrangements and learning new tunes. And, you know, I guess I kind of have an insight into what he does because I play with him. And so, you know, people know that he's somebody who conscientiously promotes his trio and his band, and he's always got work. I mean, there's so many people. I mean, you know, for me, you know, I'm like a yokel from Columbus, Ohio, and this guy was, you know, playing opposite Thelonious Monk and Billie Holiday. That's, you know, auspicious. If I was still in Columbus, you know, the nearest I get to Billie Holiday would be a poster in a store, you know, truthfully. So it's a great experience. And as a person, I mean, I can't get over his, you know, if you will, youthful spirit. I mean, he's bringing new tunes and writing new arrangements. My experience as a musician, as a freelance musician, I play with a lot of different people, a lot of different pianists who do the same stuff that Al does. So I kind of can see what Al does that's different from what other people do if we're all playing kind of the same mainstream jazz repertoire. And Al, not unlike, but in his own way, definitely has his own take on the music. And so every tune we do, I mean, to tell you the truth, this is one of the things that I've been, you know, I complain occasionally about. He always, there's so many tunes I've played with him that somebody else asks if we can play it, and I'm not sure I know it because he has such a unique take on it that, you know, it might take a left turn that most people aren't used to doing. But to tell you the truth, I really admire his spirit that is, for me, you know, growing up in sort of I was trained in the music school environment. I went to Berkeley for a while and also got to go to New England Conservatory. And so I didn't grow up in the clubs except, you know, between undergraduate and graduate school, playing with Al for 5 or 6 years. That was real, you know, authentic experience. I hope I'm not going on too much.
Do you have any charts? Do you have any of Al's charts?
Oh, yeah.
If we had one of Al's charts, this would explain everything Dave's talking about. Because every chord is a reharm, and they're all like in Al's hieroglyphics on there, and it's a trip. He makes it work. He knows what he wants in his head. But if you had a chart to pass around, that would be classic.
We don't have it, but let me see if I can help you here. Let me see what Sean Montero said about, because what he's talking about, at least for me, is the musicianship that Al requires. Thank you, David. Al requires a lot of musicianship when you play with him, because he might change key or anything, you know, because it's about what's happening at the time also, which is the real spirit of what's happening with the music. We can have some form and structure, and we can have predetermined what the tune's going to be and what key is in, but, you know, with this music, you can have tempo changes. Somebody might, and it moves, and you have to move as a collective. You're playing with a trio, or particularly with a trio or quartet, you have to be willing to do that. You have to listen for that. Here's what Sean Montero said, whose father was the great Jimmy Woody, the great bass player. I interviewed Sean for this. Let me see if I can say this. She's a vocalist. He was such a sweet gentleman, and he amazed me for his age with how much knowledge he had of music. I would call a tune and call a key. It didn't matter what key it was in. He could play it. The younger people are not there as far as the American Songbook is concerned. Ron and I were talking about it. Most folks, you know, younger than I, and in particular the kids I teach, most of them don't know what the Great American Songbook is. And that's our responsibility. It's not their fault that they don't know it. It's our responsibility to make sure they know it. Half of them don't know Fly Me to the Moon or Night and Day or My Old Flame or whatever in the key of G, and I had to charge. He said, I don't need it, because he never followed them anyway. He really, really opened my ears. Now, this is a singer. This is Sean Montero, who teaches down in Hart School of Music. She's an outstanding singer. Tours a lot in Europe, and is outstanding. He was one of the first people to really make me think about what I was doing when I was singing, and not taking for granted that everybody's going to play the tune, the form, and that's it. Al really kept you on your toes. If you weren't a true, genuine singer, should have had. The proof was in the pudding, because he would put you through the ringer the very first night you would work with him. Can you imagine a young singer standing there and all of a sudden he modulates, like you be in the key of C and he go to F sharp on you, right? Well, and sometimes singers didn't realize they had to have that type of understanding of music. As a saxophone player, I know that already, right? That happened early in my career. Learn to play every tune in every key, right? So it doesn't make any difference. Sometimes singers don't get that. Luckily, I know the American Songbook, so I went right along with him. Those were some of the best times of my life. I had great times with Al Vega. That's Sean Montero talking about that. And we've got Rebecca Ferris in here and some other people talking about what Al's legacy was. But you know, we talk a lot. Let's play some music about Al's legacy. And then I do want to come back a little bit. We're going to watch our time here because I think we got to roll out here in about 15 minutes or so. We do have the books for sale. Misha Swaby back here who helped produce. One of the things we do here at Northeast is that we get kids involved through co-op and experiential education. She was the co-producer of the John Coltrane Memorial Concert this year. Misha Swaby, who's a senior getting ready to graduate in political science and international what? She's the future. There's the future right there. All right, so she has the books for sale if you're interested in getting them. But let's do a little more music before we get out of here. Virginia, you think you might like that? Sure. How can we? But is the piano too far away? No. Can we roll it up here without it going out of tune?
No, don't do that. It's just two tables.
It's just two tables?
We can just place two tables, we can do it.
We even need to displace this.
How about it? Come on.
Well, at least move it a little.
By the way, our photographer, Pino Domenico, you can see a lot of Al Vega's photos on your website. If you go to alvega90.com, just go to alvega90.com. You'll see a lot of Al photos, hundreds and hundreds of them on the website. And you can see Al. For those of you who have never seen what he looks like, handsome guy at 90. The ladies are still crazy about him.
How many people here have ever heard Virginia Eskin play? Raise your hand. Yes, indeed. So most of you haven't, so get ready for a great treat. Okay, we're just going to move it slow. This is another aspect of what the music is about. You know, you make the situations work, right? Don't run over nobody. Virginia, don't you touch that thing. Let them guys push that thing up there. I got a bad back, so I'm not touching it. Watch yourself, watch yourself. Did we pay the liability? Did the President Aoun pay the liability insurance this week? That's good. Right there. Stop. That's good. That's good. Well, yeah, bless.
You folks still captive? There we
go. I don't know if I remember that tune. Why don't you do a trio version of it? Do a trio version.
Can I play one short piece?
Yes,
Because
you can.
It ties in with this wonderful spirit that you're talking about, and it's very Northeastern. I love to play ragtime, as Leonard knows, and I started a recording project for Koch called the Rags Project. How many of you know what is a rag? What is it? Tell me. Well, it's of course what Scott Joplin is so well known for. It's the mashup of steady versus unsteady, but it's morphed into many, many, many shapes. And there's a great story. A white man named Joseph Lamb was at Stark, the ragtime publisher at the turn of the century, and he played a rag, and old man Stark said, "Nah, that doesn't make it," or something. And Joplin happened to be right outside in the hall, and he heard the rag, and Lamb was devastated that Stark didn't buy it. And it's the only time I know where a black man had this incredible power, because of course he was very well published by then and made a lot of money for the publisher. So he said, well, let's go back to my apartment and we'll work on that rag. We'll fix it. And they did, and Stark did buy it. And what Leonard and Ron were talking about is this incredible fact that jazz is the only type of music that has no color. It has no, you know, anybody of any ethnic persuasion can play it. That's not true in the classical world, because the classical business is all about don'ts, and jazz is all about do's. So it's, and I'm a weird hybrid. My father was in Paul Whiteman's band, and he wanted me to be a jazz musician, and my mother said, nah, she'll, you know, rot in bars. So I grew up always wanting to play, and in my next life, I want to be Diana Krall and Marcus Roberts. So I'm going to play very quickly. It's called American Beauty Rag, and it was written by Joe Lamb with Scott Joplin's help. It's very pretty. It's not a thumpy rag.
So how about the blues? How about doing the blues?
You don't know that?
Now she's gonna make me remember. Do a blues in there. So we're going to do this is spontaneous on the spot. This is called Blues for Hours. We're going to play it right now. Beautiful. Some people misunderstand. They think the blues is about that kind of thing. If you really understand the blues, blues always has hope and beauty in it. Always. Always has. A lot of people who write jazz history books never understood that because they don't play it and they haven't lived it. The blues really comes out with the experiences of African Americans in this country. Morphed over and crossed over. Everybody want to sing my blues, but nobody want to live my blues. Right? So it has that root in it because that hope was the powerful thing in this music that comes from spirituals and work songs and field hollers that allowed African Americans to maintain some sense of sanity and hope over 250 and 300 years of enslavement, of being told that they were not human beings and subjected to all types of atrocities and things of that nature. This music comes out of that experience. That's what, you don't know anything else about the roots of this music, that's where it comes from. It can become colorless because it does envelop the human spirit. But in its roots of it, it comes from the Black American experience in the United States of America. And it's the music that empowered the people to have enough hope that one day we's all going to be free. And one day we're going to be president in the United States of America. We are. So that's the hope that's in the music, and that's the hope that's in the blues. Blues and everything.
Okay. A one, two, three.
Virginia Eskin. We've got to wrap this up because there's time limits on this. I want to thank you all for coming out. I do want to say a couple of things before we wrap up. We do have the book for sale, so we hope you take advantage of it. It's $20. It's right over there. Misha, be glad to take a cash or check, or if you want to take an order form and think about it, we have those over there for you also. One thing I do want to share in terms of my respect and admiration for Al has to do, really part of this story, his story is also stick-to-itiveness and longevity. So if you really think of Al's life from 1921 to 2011, all that he's seen happen, not only in the music, but changes he's seen in the world. And this music has been a part of all those changes in his life that he's seen over all this period of time. He's a first-generation American. I think I said that at the beginning of the night. His father was Armenian, his mother was Bulgarian. They came over here at the late 19th century looking for a new opportunity, right? So he doesn't come out of the Louis Armstrong, New Orleans tradition. And the point I want to make on that is about the power of this music, right? And I am serious about the roots of this music are in the African-American experience. That African-American experience is our common experiences as human beings. It's not a segregated experience, really. That we did have segregation at the time, but what we need to understand is that what it does is that the music pulls us together as human beings. And that's the reason Ron can talk about how this music has gone around the world, right? It's important. When the Japanese were in the concentration camps in World War II, it was jazz music to sustain, Japanese Americans, I should say, who've been here for generations, they got put in concentration camps in World War II. It was jazz music that they played during those 4 or 5 years that we're in there. And it's clear that some of the folks in the concentration camps in Europe, when the Nazis were going crazy, turned to this music as a source, okay? So this music has qualities in it that pull us all together as human beings. And hopefully as we move forward into the 21st century, we can move closer down that path so we can recognize the commonalities that we all have as human beings and the gift of life that we've been given here on earth and the responsibilities that come with that, which is to make the world a better place for everybody, regardless of skin color, sex, belief system, all that stuff. Because there's enough stuff out here for everybody. There is enough stuff for everybody around the world. We just have to get serious as humanity to making that work for everybody in the world. And this music speaks to that equality. It speaks to that clearly. And that's the reason it touched Al as a 8 or 9 year old. He told his mother, I don't want to do that European classical stuff. I'm hearing this stuff by Ellington and on the radio. I want to play that music. Because it touched him. It touched him in some ways the European classical couldn't. It doesn't mean it's better. It just touched him in some ways. And here we are 90 years later. He's 90 years into his life later. Bless his heart, he can't be here, but I feel his spirit. And his energy and his contributions are exactly what this music is about. What the music requires is integrity and sincerity. It really doesn't care what color you are if you're going to put the time and sincerity in it. That's what the music requires. And that's the reason some of you or most of you all are here tonight. You either knew about Al, you had some relationship with jazz, or maybe you're just a good alumni. But hopefully one of the things you'll take away with you tonight is the majesty of this music and the majesty of the people who played it. And Al Vega certainly has that majestic legacy here in the greater Boston area. So I want to thank you all for coming out. Hope you buy 1 or 2 or 3 books. But whether you do or not, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Say a prayer for Al. And let's hope that he gets all the way back to health here. And now Amy has some things she wants to say to you.
Thank you, Leonard, and thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Amy Belmore. I'm the Director of Signature Events for Alumni Relations. And like Al said, as Leonard said, Al was a student here at Northeastern, and once a Husky, always a Husky, right? We say that around here, and many of you are here from our alumni family, a family that is 207,000 alumni strong, living in 147 countries, every state in the U.S., and it really is a population that is unified by the experience of education that you had here at Northeastern, just like jazz being a unifying part of our culture like we've been talking about tonight. So I just want to thank you all for coming out and being part of this family. I do want to mention a couple of things that some of you, especially alumni, would be very interested, I think, in knowing, because some of you have been away from your years as a student for some amount of time here. But one thing that you can be really proud of, I think, is the rise in the rankings and the rise in the stature of Northeastern, especially over recent years. You'd be interested to know, I think, that going into this past year's fall semester, Northeastern received 43,000 applications for the incoming freshman class, which was a record-setting number not only for Northeastern, but the largest number for any private university around the country. So a tremendous statement for the type of education that students receive here today, that you're hearing from professors like Leonard Brown and another professor I did want to mention tonight. I'm sure you know, Leonard, about the New Orleans' own Hot 8 Brass Band is our next Arts Alive event. It is a group, I'm sure you probably know more about them than I do, but they're coming to campus on December 2nd. Their work was highlighted in some of the documentary films that were produced after Hurricane Katrina, and much of their work helped to contribute to the rebuilding of New Orleans. And they're coming to campus, and we're delighted to have them, and we're delighted to feature one of Leonard's good colleagues, Emmett Price, will be our speaker for that. And so I invite you all to come out for that program on December 2nd. And I also just want to share with you, too, a thought to take away as our students receive this incredible education, incredible co-op opportunities, as many of you had yourselves as alumni. There are co-op employers, number over 2,100 co-op employers on every continent in, I believe it is 54 countries, 34 states. Our students are traveling all around the globe. At any given day, there are students on every corner of this globe learning experiential opportunities. And so all of that comes, of course, from funding. And one thing I just wanted to mention is that tuition here at Northeastern covers about 60% of the costs associated. And the rest, the balance of the expenses, come from giving by alumni and parents and friends of the university. So I invite you to think about giving back, especially as we head into this holiday season. And certainly myself, Laura, my colleague at the front desk, can give you more information about that. So just something to take away tonight, and more importantly, wanted to add my thanks to all of you for coming, to Leonard, and to
Ron Della Chiesa.
Ron, of course, I'm sorry. And I also, Nina had the great suggestion too. We have a poster over on the table where the books are, where we wanted to invite attendees to sign the poster, and we wanted to send it off to Al, sort of in recognition for his role here tonight. Although he's not with us, we'd like to let him know that we were keeping him here in spirit. So if you want to do that, you can sign that poster, and we'll make sure he gets that real soon. Thank you so much again.
Send him a get well message.
Okay.
Tell him how much you love him. Thanks so much. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Be safe and be careful.